I'm Roderick Kefferpütz, and you're listening to the Böll-Europe podcast, a podcast brought to you by the EU office of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, the German political foundation affiliated with the Green Party. Join us as we discuss some of the most pressing political issues facing the European Union today. Each episode features in-depth conversations with key stakeholders, influential actors, and expert analysts. Discover diverse perspectives and gain valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities shaping the future of Europe. So tune in and find out more about our work at eu.böll.org. The European Parliament elections might be over, but that doesn't mean that the constellation of power in the EU is all set in stone. In this episode, we're looking at what the European election result actually means for the EU and the future of the Green Deal, how the Greens in the European Parliament are doing, what their priorities are, and whether the Greens just might be the new power broker that's necessary for the Conservatives, Social Democrats, and Liberals to hold a stable majority. So I'm very excited to have with us Bas Eickhout, long-standing member of the European Parliament, and for a couple of weeks now already, co-chair, co-president of the Greens EFA Group. Bas, it's great to have you on our podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. So good to see you.
Fantastic. Well, we have got a lot of ground to cover. So let me get straight into it. The European election is over. Europe has voted. What do you make of the results?
I really think that that this time it was really not a European campaign. So 5 years ago, we had the feeling that there was really a kind of a start of a European campaign on European topics. Climate was one of those. But in general, you felt like, hey, this is becoming a bit of a European campaign. I have to be very honest, this time it has been a bit of a setback on that. Very nationally determined, nationally oriented campaigns. And also the results are very, very national. So I don't think there is one clear message coming out of these elections. Of course, what we see is in more countries the rise of the far right. And that is what everyone is talking about. But I think it's a bit too simplistic to have that as the only reading of these elections. Because what you see at the same time is that, for example, in the Nordic countries, and then specifically Sweden and Finland, where the far right is in the government, there you see that they really took a hit. They really lost. And interestingly enough, it's the left. And in Denmark, it's the Greens even becoming the biggest. But also in Sweden, the Greens did very well. In Finland, it was more the left party that did very well. So basically, you see in the Scandinavian countries a move to the left. And no one is talking about it. And it's kind of, well, people, that's also Europe, you know. It's a bit weird to only talk about the big countries because they indeed have the big numbers. But you also have to look at the percentages, and then looking at how the left is doing in Finland, that's a great result for them.
Yeah, but look at the seats. I mean, Greens EFA Group has shed quite some seats, right?
Yes, but if you then look, where does it come from? Sorry to say, it's Germany, France.
Yeah, sure.
It's two countries. Yeah. Of course, we had some more little losses there, but what you also see is that we really substantially increased in the north, the east, and the south. We did poor basically in the founding fathers of the EU, maybe with the exception of the Netherlands, I have to say, as a Dutch, of course. But it is true that we lost percentage-wise quite big in Belgium, in Luxembourg, in France and Germany, and a bit in Austria, although there, if you look at how the campaign was very anti the lead candidate, Lena Schilling, and then still getting to 10%, that I would say, relatively speaking, pretty good results still in Austria.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I think the biggest losses were really in Germany and France, but they can also be very well explained by national context. In France, it's always that you have a huge gap between Mélenchon and Macron. And certainly with European elections, if you are a bit of a progressive, pro-European voter in France, where do you need to go? Because Macron is not progressive anymore. And Mélenchon is certainly not pro-Europe.
Definitely not.
We can also have a discussion on whether he's progressive, by the way, but that's another debate. So then you have a huge gap there, which last time was filled by the Greens, and then the Socialists were very depressed. This time the Socialists got the big of it, and the Greens took the hit. That was basically what happened in France. And in Germany, it's clearly a dissatisfaction with the government, and I think because the Greens are the most visible party in that government, and therefore probably most identified with the government, took the biggest hit.
Well, I think there was a number of reasons for the.
Well, you know the German situation better than I do.
There were a number of reasons, and obviously being part of the government was one of them. I think there were also other issues such as communication and people being a bit tired of change, possibly. And change is obviously always a big green message. But the big winner really in this election, if you can call it, the big winner, it was the EPP, right? The Conservatives. And I think one thing that I've learned over the years is that, the election is one thing, but it also matters what happens after the election.
Sometimes it's even more important what happens after.
Yeah. Exactly.
You can be a winner and then 2 weeks later you're the loser.
That's exactly it.
Or the other way around, I would say. And it's exactly that phase we are in. And the difficulty is that, of course, you come out of a campaign full of adrenaline. You're still in this campaign mode. You are still like, and whether you won, then it's really like, we've won. Now we can tell the others because we've won.
We won it all.
and certainly EPP had that feeling. And I think already when we were discussing the top jobs, right, in the council, where EPP was like, hey, we won so big, so maybe we should also go for the council presidency. And that was, of course, clear that would go to the Socialists. And then, but maybe only for 2.5 years. Yeah. So they were just really outselling their game.
Yeah, they overplayed their hand.
They overplayed their hand very clearly. And I think also the end game all around the top jobs was a bit more like EPP, Christian Democrats, back in your, bit more back to earth. Back to earth.
A little humility.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think if you look at the election night, indeed, you're absolutely right. I mean, apart from the far right, I think it's striking to see that it was the Conservatives and the Christian Democrats who, the EPP, were the winners in solidifying basically in each country what they had, and in some countries even gaining ground. And the ones taking the hit were mainly the Liberals and the Greens. But I do think that the Greens, after the elections, what we have shown immediately is that we are calm, relaxed, and stable. We immediately choose our new leadership. There was a solid majority for that. In the group, immediately pretty calm attitude. And of course, immediately going for expanding our group. So getting Volt in, getting the Pirates in, getting some individuals in. And basically Renew, totally split. They always have these two sides, of course, but now even more split than ever before. Losing the Czechs, I would say they never really belonged in the Liberal group, but now they also really lost it. So there's not a good mood there. So they lost the election night, but I think they didn't manage to get out of that corner where the hitting is, so to say. And we as Greens, well, you could almost say we managed to get out of that corner, and now it's the Liberals only standing down.
And now the question is, of course, what coalition will vote for Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament? Yeah,
maybe just to be very precise, we are recording this while we are in the midst of this. So
tell us.
Yes, exactly. I probably am sometimes going to be a very typical politician now and then. Apologies for everyone who's listening. Because I can't say everything. But I do think what I can say is that now von der Leyen has officially been proposed by the Council. She just now needs to get to the majority in the European Parliament. And basically, she knows this is going to be the most complicated step.
And she's spoken with you.
And indeed, she is very good in calculating and very good in summing up numbers, so to say. And I have to say, I'm not so sure everyone in the European Parliament has done the right calculation yet. And I think what you see is that the three parties that formed the previous coalition, so Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and Liberals, it's of course attractive to have the feeling, can't we just continue? Don't make our lives complicated. So let's stick to that. But number-wise, they will get to 400. Which, of course, you could say, hey, that's still enough, 720.
Exactly.
They need officially
361.
That's
right?
the golden number she needs to aim for. However, we also always know, well, first of all, not everyone will be there. Don't ask me why. I have never seen the European Parliament where all the members are present. I don't know what they are doing, but they're never 100% there. So from the 400 that you have mathematically, you can already discount 10, 20 that will just not be there. And you need those votes. On top of that, it's a secret vote. So even someone that will say in your face, "No, we'll be fine," then still at the moment, no, I abstain, which is also a problem.
Happened last time,
Happened last time. I mean, she thought she had a massive majority. On top of that, back then, she got the support of Fidesz, which was still in the Christian Democrats, by the way. So that was part of it, but also the PiS party, the Polish ruling party by then. So number-wise, she should have had a solid majority. And in the end, the vote was only with 9 votes difference. So that, of course, that trauma is still very vivid in Ursula von der Leyen's mind, which is logical. If she does the same calculation as last time, you're not there. She doesn't have a majority.
So where will she get the majority from?
Well, and that's the big question where I think not everyone is very clear yet. But to me, it's quite simple. Renew and S&D made very clear we will not accept a coalition with a far right. And to them, the far right starts really with ECR.
Okay.
So they mentioned explicitly no deal with ECR, which of course for S&D is very clear because the big winner in S&D are the Italians. They are the biggest delegation in S&D. And the Italian socialists from the PD, they of course cannot afford that they would go for a president that has the support of Meloni.
Yeah.
That just
is a no-go.
It's a no-go. And also von der Leyen knows I can get them, but then I lose the socialists. So I win 30 and I lose 20. So it's not a big gain. So also for von der Leyen, I don't see a possible path with the far right that will bring on those numbers. So then, the only thing that is left, whether you like it or not, is the Green Group. I don't see any other way. And of course, I'm not very neutral, but I also just don't see it number-wise. Mathematically, there is no other way. So, and this is, of course, what Ursula von der Leyen has also seen. So indeed, she basically immediately when she was appointed or proposed by the council, she got in contact with us, with Terry Reinke and me, to really discuss, let's meet.
Yeah.
And let's have a talk on what is possible.
Because those green votes, they don't come for free.
No, of course not. We're not.
So what's the price, Bas?
It's a big price. No, I think what we have said, what we have now told every time to the broader audience is we have, of course, all our wishes, but we are also not crazy. We do know that that we are then a smaller group in this bigger coalition, so we cannot demand our full program.
Sure.
But what we made very clear, no coalition with the far right. So it's either us or you have fun with others. No backtracking on the Green Deal, continuation of the Green Deal and no backtracking.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. And of course, a much tougher stance and an active commission on rule of law and protecting our democracy, because that's another big challenge that we are having ahead of us as Europe in our reading also of the current situation. And those, of course, these are pretty general points that we make, but that's kind of the starting basis for us. Then, of course, there is the entire security, Ukraine, accession, etc. But there we are very clear that we are very aligned with the other pro-European parties. And if you look at our voting behavior in the previous term, on all these issues, we have always voted together. So it's a priority. It's a priority for all the parties. There, I don't expect a major problem. I think there is a very solid support for Ukraine. And including the discussion on European defense. And also there, the Greens know that we need to have it, and we are also in favor of that. So no debate, no question about that. So on rule of law, I think it's also all the parties are now really also aiming for. So also there, I don't expect major problems. And of course, we have concrete proposals there. Let's see how concrete we can get. I think the big debate will be around the Green Deal, because what we are also very clearly calling for is a green and social deal, basically.
Okay.
And there, of course, we are very much aligned with the socialists. I think we can, if the socialists and the Greens would sit together, they probably could draft a program quite quickly. But here, of course, is a bit of this is where the debate will be if you talk to the Christian Democrats and part of the Liberals, right? The Liberals, 50% would be on our side, 50% would be on the Christian Democratic side.
I mean, I think that's really the hot issue right now, the future of the Green Deal, right?
It is, absolutely.
And I have the impression there's already been a little bit of a back roll and a little bit of a watering down on the Green Deal. For example, in the whole area of agriculture, in the context of the farmers' protests and so forth. And then we also have this whole attempt to supplant the Green Deal with other deals, the industrial deal or competitiveness deal. Yeah. We've had enough of the green. We need more industry now.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Well, I think in the campaign that has become a bit rhetorically kind of as if there is an opposition between the Green Deal and an industrial deal. What we deliberately already during the campaign said, we also want an industrial deal. Because simply put, right, we now have our climate targets in place. We can meet those climate targets in two ways. You can meet it by kicking out all the industry out of Europe. Then emissions will go down, emissions will go down.
And unemployment will go up.
Yeah, but that doesn't emit, right? So, and there are some people maybe thinking that this is the green target. That's absolutely not how we want to achieve those climate targets.
Yeah.
We want to reach those climate targets with industry. And this is also why we as Greens also during the campaign launched our vision on a green industrial deal to make very clear that to our reading, the only way for our industry to be competitive in the future is by embracing green innovation, embracing the Green Deal targets. But at the same time, it's also true that what we have agreed upon until now is insufficient. So we cannot now just say, okay, this was the Green Deal and we're going to have fun now and we'll let it rest. There is insufficient clarity for our industry. And I think that's on three levels a very big problem. First, of course, energy. We still have a very high energy price, well, for consumers for sure as well, but also for our industry.
Yeah.
Still, roughly said, the energy price in the United States is half of what the European industry needs to pay. I'm not saying we can bridge that gap entirely, but there are still costs in our energy system that are unnecessary. And the biggest challenge here is, of course, a much more European approach to our energy grid. Because the grid is still very nationally oriented and this fragmented market basically is unnecessarily raising the price even further. So energy is a big challenge, which I think we can all agree upon. This is also kind of, if I read the manifesto of the Christian Democrats, they also are concerned about the energy price.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the top concerns of industry,
exactly.
Right? Followed a lot of the times by bureaucracy and red tape.
Yes, that's of course the narrative that bureaucracy and red tape is a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I do think there is at a certain stances there is unnecessary red tape. I just wonder to what level that's European. If I look, for example, in Germany, a lot is also German-made, I would say. So you can then look at Europe, but maybe also look at your own lovely structure, which with the federal construction, so to say, it's creating some levels of bureaucracy.
I see.
But at the same time, also, of course, Europe plays a role there. But already there in the revision of the Renewable Directive, we have been explicitly looking at how can we speed up the permitting? How can we make that, faster? That we are now also going to look at all kind of reporting obligations. Is there maybe a bit too much stapling of that? And can we kind of harmonize that a bit? Everyone is in favor of that. I don't think there is any green that would say, we love to create bureaucracy for you. I think there is sometimes a political debate, and some conservatives say, let's delete all the reporting, which is kind of, the reporting is there
for a reason.
To know what the companies are doing, and quite often also what they are claiming they're doing.
Yeah, and it's part of business risk management as well.
So I think what we need to do is harmonize it better, so that indeed we're all guilty. You make a lot of legislation, and then you have a bit of reporting in this one and a reporting in another law.
Yeah.
Of course, can we now maybe look at it and say, can we not just make one reporting obligation out of it instead of in different legislations?
Yeah.
All fine. We can do that. We can improve that. We can still look a bit on, can we speed up the permitting and these kind of elements? But I think there's a lot of issues also with bureaucracy in the different member states.
I want to follow up on one particular issue of the Green Deal that's getting a lot of attention. And that's the whole ban on combustion engines.
You're a German, right? So.
Yes, exactly. And Germany, car country.
Yes.
Is this a red line for Greens? Because the EPP keeps on talking about wanting to get rid of this ban on combustion engines.
If we are saying no backtracking on the Green Deal, if you got rid of the combustion engine ban, it's backtracking, right? I mean, I don't know how you other define backtracking. So, no, we should not get rid of that 2035 target. Because basically, this is exactly what you need to do to our industry, provide clear long-term targets so that they know where they are heading for. And let's be honest, if our European car industry is not making its transition, then in 10 years' time, we will just be importing cheap Chinese cars. And now you can say, let's block that with some tariffs. But you can't stop this. You can't stop this with tariffs.
I do have to say, just walking here on the streets in Brussels, I see more and more Chinese electric vehicles on the roads.
And why is that? Is because China already 10, 15 years ago decided we are going to do industrial policy. We are going to invest in the entire production chain. So not only looking at the cars themselves, but already taking a decision quite early on. We want to be better also in the batteries and in the entire production chain. Yeah. Also getting the resources for that, the materials. And if you don't have it yourself, then you buy your way in other countries, a bit of the Chinese way. But they did explicit industrial policy while Europe was sleeping. While Europe was thinking how we can still make the combustion engine slightly more efficient, make it a bit better, a bit cleaner.
By cheating.
Partly by cheating. That turned out that maybe is not the best way. Then they did move on. This was also interesting, by the way, because they said, we were forced because the targets are unmanageable. Then the cheating was found out, was stopped. And in 2-3 years' time, they could meet the targets without cheating.
They got it done, yeah.
So in that sense, they are always underestimating themselves, I would say, how innovative they can be themselves. But now, and this is the big challenge, of course, they need to basically change from what they excel in, the combustion engine. And it's true, we Europeans, mainly in diesel, we have been very good in developing a combustion engine. But pure physically, an electric engine is superior. It's much more efficient. It's much easier to make. So it's just in the production process, energy-wise, it's superior. So you can then do two things. You can ignore physics. Never a good idea, I would say, but you can ignore physics and try to keep up your combustion engine, leadership. But the rest of the world will move the moment the prices, because that has been the problem, the prices. But what you see now is the price of the electric engine is coming down massively because the big price determinant factor, it was the battery, and the developments in the batteries is astonishing. So it's outperforming all the projections. So the price is going down of the electric car. At a certain moment, the combustion engine is just done. So I would advise the European industry.
But then you don't need a ban.
Well, what you need, and this is, of course, because this also leads to a different charging infrastructure. So there is a bit of a chicken and egg problem.
That's true.
With the electric car. And this is also why I have to say this talking about we need to be technology neutral. No government has ever been technology neutral, because you also need to think of the infrastructure. And if you say, let's stay technology neutral, well, and where are we going to wait for investments in infrastructure? So you need a signal to the car industry. You need to go there.
Yeah.
That's the ban 2035.
Yeah.
Deliver, by the way, it's a zero emission target, right? But indeed, the superior for cars the superior technology will be electric cars. So they want to go there, but then of course consumers, but also the car industry itself, they want to know for sure that people want to buy those cars. And the big reason why they're not going to buy it for now, prices, but that will go down. Then the reason is, of course, will I be sure that I can charge it?
Yeah.
So we need investments in the charging infrastructure.
Sure. And for that, you need that signal.
Exactly. Because now suddenly the car industry is lobbying also for charging infrastructure. So suddenly they come on your side in lobbying for the same.
I want to talk to you about, we mentioned it earlier, the kind of rollback and watering down of the Green Deal in the agricultural field,
Yes.
be it on pesticide reduction and a lot of it taking place in the context of the farmers' protests.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the farmers' protests? I mean, there are also legitimate concerns, aren't there?
Absolutely. No, I mean, the biggest mistake you could make as a green movement is to say, oh, these are those bad farmers and they're polluting and they should shut up. By the way, I do think that some of the protests we saw was organized, right? I mean, we know that Orban and his organization was paying money also to some of it. So that there is an organized part, but that's a bit what you see. The dissatisfaction is broader. And I would say rightfully so. I think the biggest problem with our farmers, what we're having, is that if you look at the economic kind of incentives that are being developed, both just by the market, but also by European subsidy systems, so the common agriculture policies, they both work in the direction of large-scale farming. The bigger, the more money you get.
Yeah.
And because of the poor position in the chain, in the entire agro-food chain, the position of the farmer is, of course, you have a lot of producers, a lot of consumers, but you have a couple of big players that are in between, supermarkets, or that are at the input side. So it's the pesticides industry, the chemical industry. So these farmers are basically squeezed between big players who own the market and determine the market price and who determine where the profits is going to take place. There are still a lot of profits in that entire agro-food chain. They just don't land at the farmers. So what do you need to do as a farmer? Produce more.
Yeah.
Because your profits go down per product. So you need to produce more in order still to earn a bit of a living out of it. And that has been a trend for years now. This has nothing to do with the Green Deal. Over the last 20 years, we've lost 1/3 of our farmers in Europe.
Wow.
While the agriculture size remains the same. So this is a large-scale farming. That is the trend that we see in agriculture. Doesn't make any farmer happy either.
No.
Maybe a couple of Dutch, maybe, but usually most of the farmers don't want to be forced to become so large-scale because it really becomes more of an industrial practice than why you started the business. Yeah. So no one really wants it, but it's a trend. And then on top of that, we and our subsidies are having this lovely income support. The more hectares, the more money. So that is an economic direction to large scale. Then enters the Green Deal, then enters green policies, and they are looking at, okay, we are having challenges with climate extremes. So we need a more resilient agriculture system that can deal with extremes. We need an agriculture system that is less dependent on pesticides. All that is basically a much more diversified agriculture system, which usually is not, that doesn't fit the large scale.
No, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do as a farmer? You are in between. The economic incentives go to one side, and then the Green Deal incentives pull you in another direction. Basically, a farmer is pulled apart in two different directions. And then, of course, they don't know what to do. And then, of course, they get very angry if then all kind of policymakers are saying, you are a problem. Well, maybe we as a policymakers have not thought through well enough that our economic incentives and our green incentives should work in the same direction.
Yeah, they should be aligned.
They should be aligned. And that we haven't done. And this is, I think, the most fundamental problem of farmers. Of course, it's then easy to scapegoat the green policies, and that's what conservative politicians do. They don't want to talk about the difficult issues like restructuring market incentives, etc. Oh, that's complicated. You may have to be nasty to some of the big players in the chemical industry, the fertilizer industry, so you don't want to do that. Blame it on the green policies.
Yeah, that's easy.
It's easy. And that's why you're conservative, because then you keep it all as how it is. But I don't think that's a sustainable, not from an environmental perspective, but also not from an economic perspective.
We're nearing the end of our podcast. And one of the questions that I want to ask you, because you mentioned some of that earlier, is also the development of the far right.
Yes.
But also the development of the conservatives. Because within the European People's Parties, the Christian Democrats, you also have progressive elements, and you have elements that are, willing to, go in a coalition with the far right. How do you see this developing over the next 5 years, and what role do Greens play within that?
Well, I do think that, generally said, there is a big assignment for all the pro-European and pro-democratic forces in the European Parliament. So therefore, when we started, we can, of course, do a bit of fun about the mathematics, and you need the 4, and it's silly not to see that. But I think there's also a very serious part in that, and that is that what we see is that in the trend, the pro-democratic, pro-European forces are shrinking. And that's a bit in the center. So the center is shrinking. Whereas all the challenges that we are seeing for all of us demand more of a European approach, be it climate, be it our security, be it our economy, be it our defense. I don't see that any country in the EU can solve that on its own.
Yeah.
Even not Germany. I mean, I know in Germany, sometimes you think 80 million people, we can still do a lot. It's nothing. You're nothing compared to the US, to China, India, the Africans that coming up. We are nothing on our own. So we need more and more a strong European approach to almost all of these issues that we just discussed. And the people don't feel secure enough to put that trust in a bigger European setting, basically. And this is where the far right is profiting from. It's not that they are bringing brilliant solutions, but they are just feeding they are feeding the feeling of insecurity and unpredictability, not knowing where the future will be. And it's a very human reaction. If you do not know how the future will look like, you stay put, you stay a bit. And this is why it's easier to be conservative, because it's a bit of a natural reaction. If you are a bit insecure about the future, you don't move.
Yeah.
But that's basically the wrong solution if you look at all those challenges. And you can say progressive politicians failed in making very clear on why sitting still is not a solution. So we have something to learn from that as well, as progressive politicians, I would say. But the more progressive part of the conservatives also need to realize that you have two options now. You can look to your right and then court with them, but they don't want real solutions at the European level. They don't want to have kind of actions that really are head on the challenges we're having. And so they also, not only because of the numbers, but they also, for the solutions, should build a bridge with progressives that in the end do want the same with our European democracy and our European future. And this is a big assignment for progressives and conservatives. We have different ideas of the world, and we come up with different ideas how to solve it. Sometimes we have a different analysis what the big problem is, for example, migration. But nevertheless, we have to do this together. We need to bridge between those two big blocks of conservatives and progressives if we want to achieve European solutions that people can see. If we're not doing it right the coming 5 years, I am afraid that we get forces that will tear Europe apart afterwards.
I think this is one of the magic.
Nice ending, right?
You want to finish already?
No.
Well, I think this is one of the magic formulas, right? That, as you said, when there are insecurities, people pull back and kind of, you want to go into your own cocoon when in fact you need to move forward. Yeah. But at the same time, you can't move forward too fast because you risk losing.
That's the biggest dilemma. Because if you listen to the climate scientists, they are basically saying you need to move faster.
Yes.
There's no climate scientist that is saying, oh yeah, take your time. They're just saying, please, Europe, you need to go faster. I would say economically, we also need to go faster because America and China are not waiting. Even with American elections and we get a crazy guy, he will not dismantle the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has nothing to do with inflation reduction. It's just
they needed to sell it somehow.
I would say it's even increasing inflation, but that's another discussion. But it's a massive green investment program what the Americans are throwing in. It's billions and billions of dollars they're throwing into green economy. So China is doing it, the United States is doing it, the Middle East is doing it, and Africa is coming, and India is coming. We can't afford to sit still. So both environmentally and economically, we need to accelerate. Although indeed the feeling of people is, can we not, there's a lot of
have
changes.
A breather.
Yeah, a lot of change. Can we slow down a bit? Here we need to find a balance. And this is basically, of course, what you get if you put progressives and conservatives together and willing to work together. So I think this is our biggest assignment to work on that. But of course, and this is a bit where the Greens will have the most difficulty in that, you feel that pressure of the environmental system, as some always say, well, you can't do compromises with physics. And that is, of course, true. So you do feel that pressure, but we really
you need to do compromises in society.
Yes, and so in that sense, we will have to do that. But there, of course, it's kind of how can we strike a balance where we feel like that we are still listening to science and to physics, but at the same time, also take into consideration also the concerns of people. And I think here, of course, and this is also why in our program, we very much also said it's not only a Green Deal, it should also be a social deal, because too often the people have felt that the solutions were for the people that already can carry it.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, the image of the electric car. People think of a very expensive Tesla. Forget about the Tesla for many reasons, I would say. And that's, of course, for the haves, something reachable, but for a lot of people, totally not reachable.
Yeah.
Well, the same in the entire discussion we also saw in Germany on the heat pump.
Yeah.
It feels like we need to do massive investments. I'm not so sure my house will be as valuable as later on. It's a massive jump. And at the same time, they have the feeling, but the industry is getting subsidies and they're being... So the level of unfairness in the approach until now, and let's be honest, that's also partly in the European setting, partly also because Europe can do pricing mechanisms, etc. But in the end, social policies are at the national level. There's a fundamental mismatch, I would also say, in our construction of Europe. These are the elements we also really need to address the coming 5 years, because otherwise people will feel like, okay, it's a program that is just put onto us without listening to us, and we need to pay for it. Yeah, that's, if you want to get rid of people's support, this is the way. And that we've seen a bit, of course. So, a lot of challenges and striking this balance. I think we have to do that now with the current pro-democratic, pro-European forces that we are still having that majority in the House. But you do feel it a bit like the coming 5 years will be maybe our last chance to do it right.
So what keeps you optimistic?
That I think a very important one is that industry has changed fundamentally. So where in the old days, and some want to revive that, it's either industry or green and you bash each other. Really, and I have to admit, 10 years ago, when I was talking about climate targets, in some settings I would be thrown out of the room, or in the best way, we had a long discussion on the targets. Basically, on targets, we don't have a debate anymore. The most serious industry, they know, okay, we need to be climate neutral.
We agree on the goal.
We agree on that, but we have concerns how to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's discuss that. And then we have a long discussion. But they do feel like this is where we want to go. So the industry has changed. And industry is, of course, also having its kind of impact on the employers because they're there as well. I do see the trade unions change as well. More and more of the trade unions who, of course, sometimes have a bit the feeling like, how can we maintain our current employment? Also realizing, well, if the world is changing and we just sit still, we're dead. So we need to adapt.
Yeah.
For example, in the Netherlands, it was the trade unions who forced the steel factory. We have one big steel factory in the Netherlands, and they forced that steel factory, Tata Steel, to come up with a carbon transition plan, because it was the trade unions realizing if we don't change our production, then also because of the support of the people around, it's also health is becoming more of an issue for people. So they realized if we want to survive here, we really need to adapt drastically.
Yeah.
And it was the trade unions forcing the employers to adapt that as well. And there you saw in the end a combination of the CEO with the trade unions coming up with a future plan.
Fantastic.
That's the changes you see in a society that gives you hope, where you feel like, okay, there are people that are looking further down and looking further ahead. And if we can then bridge, allies between allies that usually are working against each other, then Europe has a bright future. And that is something we need to work on also as politicians. I think that's our big assignment. And that makes you positive. So it's the pressure, the time pressure and all that makes you really sometimes scared. And also I can be very uncertain. But then these kind of developments, you feel like, but there is hope and people want to go head on and want to grab the opportunities. Well, let's I would say strengthen those people and empower those people. And hopefully that can bring hope back also to the European citizens, and then they will vote differently.
Fantastic. Bas Eickhout, a lot of work ahead for the next 5 years.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
But also a lot of hope to get that work done. Thank you very much for having been there for us.
Thank you. It was a nice talk. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Böll Europe podcast, and a big thanks to our guest Bas Eickhout for sharing his insights on the power plays at EU level and on the Greens' role in this new EU legislative cycle. If you want to stay informed, check out our web dossier on Europe after the European Parliament elections, featuring insights from the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung's offices and partners on this new EU legislative term. The latest edition of our flagship publication, Böll Thema, is now also available in English. So check out the show notes on our website for more related content, eu.böll.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Until the next episode, goodbye.